Welcome to the Paleo Post Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Chaggy, founder of the world of paleoanthropology. Join us as we journey through time to uncover the secrets of human evolution. Each episode, we delve into the groundbreaking discoveries, fascinating research, and the stories of our ancient ancestors. From the latest fossil finds to in-depth discussions with leading experts, the Paleo Post Podcast brings the past to life. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just curious about where we come from, there's something here for everyone. So let's explore our incredible human origins together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8, I believe, of the Paleo Post Podcast, Season 3. We are here joined by the wonderful Genevieve von Petzinger and Dr. George Nash. We have a wonderful and exciting episode planned for you today. There is so much news that's been going on in the world of archaeology, anthropology, and paleoanthropology, and we are going to be discussing some of that news today and exploring what makes this field just so interesting. Let's start with Genevieve. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing so well. I was going to say I'm in a different part of my house today because we're recording earlier, so I'm trying to be quiet for the kids. But then you also get the fun of like a little bit of the Yuletide stuff, right? And just as a heads up, in case it suddenly gets whooshy or my power goes, I'm in the middle of a big storm outside, so which is always fun and lots of good drama. But yes, makes me appreciate living in the cozy warmth of modern society, though, when I look at the horrible conditions outside. We're creatures of comfort, I think. Certainly have become
Absolutely.
so. But yeah, I'm well. How are you doing, George?
Well, a bit like Seth in some respects. I'm a taxi service for youngsters. So I took my little lad into my nearest town, which is called Shrewsbury. It's a beautiful medieval town. And I came rushing back, but not understanding that it's nearly Christmas. And so I got caught in the Christmas traffic and I was panicking. I was trying to get, I mean, I don't think I broke any laws speeding, but I did get back as quickly as I possibly could. So yeah, it's been a quite a hectic day today, but to domestic more than anything else.
Oh my goodness. That's so funny. Well, now we can just relax and like nerd out for a bit. So it's perfect.
Relax.
Relax, exactly. You see what you gotta breathe. Right? So do a little bit of mindfulness. That's what my 12-year-old's into it. So he's always trying to make me more mindful. So we got so many stories and we're going to do viewer questions, which is so fun too. So Seth,
Yes.
knock it out for us. Tell us about footprints. I'm excited.
All right. So, as Genevieve mentioned, there's been lots of exciting news that's popped up in the world and field of paleoanthropology. And one of the most exciting things that's happened in the last few weeks is the discovery and announcement from Dr. Louise Leakey's team in Kubifora with the co-author Dr. Kevin Hatala, and that is that they found two sets of footprints dating to about 1.5 million years old. And these sets of footprints are made by not the same species, but two different species, which is extremely significant because up until recently, we practically believed that hominins practically existed one species at a time. They did not have multiple species coexisting in the same landscape, either due to ecological pressures or evolutionary dead ends, or for any variety of reasons. But recent evidence has shown that hominins have coexisted and multiple species have lived together. For example, we have this guy right here, Paranthropus boisei, and this is one of the species who left footprints in Kubifora next to footprints that were also made 1.5 million years ago by Homo erectus, or the species that Trichonoboi belongs to.
Mhm.
This is significant because it shows that these species coexisted because their footprints were preserved around the same exact time 1.5 million years ago. They may have had different dietary needs, and thus they were able to coexist. Perhaps they had the same, but they didn't compete. We can't know for sure, but we do know these two species were there at the same time because these footprints could not have been preserved in any other way unless they were made around the same time. And while these are not the first footprints that we have discovered that potentially show two different hominid species together, as we have Laetoli, where there's two different tracks that are potentially different hominins. This is the first conclusive evidence that they are literally on top of each other, because at Laetoli, the footprints are a few kilometers apart, where here at Kubifora, these footprints are literally a few feet from each other.
Like they're almost like
Yes.
they're right there. Yeah,
They're
no, I saw a
almost
picture.
bisecting
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, I think to me, one of the things I mean, there's so many things that's so exciting. So, first of all, just to be really clear for the viewers, so this is the kind of thing where it's like that squelchy mud or whatever that you get like in the kind of that it's not intertidal, I don't know what to call it when it's a lake, but that kind of area where you leave the with like the impression and it leaves a hole, and then like
Yes.
silt or
Yeah.
something goes into it and just kind of locks it in. So it's only usually for a few hours, right? Like it's usually, or a few days,
Right.
like it's not a big time period, right? Like
It's either a situation like that or volcanic ash that they'll walk through is
Okay.
how Laetoli was made. I'm not
that's
exactly
right.
up to my points on these footprints, but I believe you're more correct on it being more of the mud that they walked through.
Yeah.
And it
I think didn't one of them
preserved.
slip? I was reading something funny about one of them almost slipped and had to like catch their balance. And so I was like, isn't that wild that we almost caught like the banana peel joke equivalent of like
I
Well, the
did not
hominid.
read that. That's
like
hysterical.
wouldn't even funny if there was a butt imprint. But so I think that's what's so cool about this stuff. Though it's like we literally are capturing a moment in time from like 1.5 million years ago, right? Like that's when it was from 1.5, which is
Exactly.
bonkers. And so probably hanging out at the watering hole, I would presume, because it was at the edge of a lake, right?
Yeah, it
Um,
was. Yeah.
so I think one of the big things the authors noted that I thought was very intriguing was they were like, again, I always wonder like what, like Homo erectus almost looks like us, right? Like from, I believe from the
Mhm.
neck down, the skeletal structure is basically ours, right? Like it's almost modern. Like they could run, they could bend like us, they would have moved a lot like us. They were also getting taller, right? Like these guys were,
Yes.
Homo erectus was taller, they were more that long, lean build. It's just their skulls were a little bit more robust. Is that correct? Like just a little more heavy skulled still, but moving more in our direction. Would that be
I wouldn't even say more robust, because they're definitely more gracile than any other like
okay?
robustus species or paranthropus.
Yeah.
But they just have different morphology than a modern human. They just
Okay.
look different. But definitely post-cranially, they look extremely modern. And like
Yes.
you said, they're the first species that can run. They're the first
Yes.
species that can do hunting where you persistence hunting.
Oh, persistent.
Um,
Yeah. So that
yeah,
long scale, just kind of
right.
that marathon
Yeah,
running thing, which many of us like to do. Well, and
exactly.
also though, so I think another point which is really cool to make too is that isn't it wild that we're in a point in the field where we can identify species by their footprints?
Yeah, yeah.
That's pretty wild, hey?
Yeah.
Going back to the geology,
Yeah,
Jen and Seth.
please.
There's a lovely Finnish term from Finland called Gurcha, and Gurcha is a very, very sticky mud which you get in sort of lakeside environments. So basically, it's like plastic, and once you get your foot in there, sometimes if you're wearing Wellington boots, it's very difficult to remove the Wellington boot out of the mud.
Been there.
Because of the lack of oxygen within the sediment, and so therefore you basically are acting like it's like a suction pad,
Mhm.
and it's more than likely that's what they were walking into, a very plastic, a very, very sticky gurcha, which
Gotcha.
I
I like
love it.
that term. Oh my gosh, was it in Cudon in Spain? I fell on my butt once there. That's why I was thinking about squelchy mud and falling over. Because my Wellington boot did get stuck in the mud. Because it was that squelchy, and literally I was trying to get my boot out. I'm in a cave and I was trying to get my boot out, and I literally I did. I went sort of, what do they call it? Like head over tea kettle, or I can't remember what the term. So I was pretty muddy that day. So been there. Yeah, no, that mud's like a whole different thing, isn't it? So, oh, that's so cool. So there's a term, getcha? Is that the term for it?
Yeah.
I love it.
Can I ask both of you, because you know this site better than I do, in fact. And I was just going to ask the question: was there any sort of crossover of the footprints? Do they sort of, was there any overlapping, or was it just two straight lines of
I think they
footprints.
were just really close together, but
Yeah.
I don't think they completely, but they also think they might have been made literally like a few minutes to a few hours apart.
Yeah.
Like they think it was a really
Mhm.
quick event. I think
Right.
it's not wild. I think the big thing I was wondering about too, though, is they did say that we don't know, because again, for the viewers who don't know, we don't have any fully sequenced genomes at this point for either Homo erectus or Paranthropus. We have some proteins now, if I'm right, but
Yes.
we don't actually have like a full DNA rebuild of either one of them. So we don't know how, like, we don't even know quite how we're related to all of them. Like, this is heavy speculation and a lot of, and again, obviously with, using academic, like, we're not just making stuff up, but it's like, at this point, it's theoretical. And I've often wondered too, because now we're pretty sure Paranthropus, was making tools, right? Because back when I was an undergrad, we didn't really know, but now we think it's quite likely they were also making tools. Am I correct with this? I feel like they've been found in association with tools enough now that it's thought they may have been making simple tools as well.
I think there was a recent paper that actually
Wasn't
did
there?
say that there was an association of tools with Paranthropus fossils.
That's
Yes.
what I thought too. I don't remember which one of the Paranthropus, but one of them.
Right. It was a
Yeah.
pretty recent paper, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, there were chopping tools, if I remember right.
Yeah, the
So-
older one style, the chopping.
Yeah. Very,
Yeah.
very simple stuff. Yeah.
So, but because I think the other question I've seen before too has been pointed out was that we don't even know, like technically speaking, we don't know exactly who our direct ancestor is. I mean, we don't think it's Paranthropus, but we don't technically know it's not, or that there's not some interbreeding that went on. And that was one of the points the authors made in the paper that of course made me giggle, and I thought about it, was that idea that we don't know if Paranthropus, they may have even been interbreeding. And at this point, we don't know genetically, like what, I mean, again, this was just part of their, we don't know how much overlap they have in the landscape. But again, if you've got two hominin species, I mean, everywhere else in the world that our ancestors went, they seem to have gotten pretty friendly with the locals. So it's entirely possible that we are talking about we don't know what level of interaction they had, like, or was it more like was it down in South America? I've heard really funny things about like the capuchins and the howler monkeys, I think, and like the capuchins come along and harass the howlers even though they're way bigger. But so we don't know if it's that style of interaction, or if they're literally interacting, like sharing resources, communicating with each other in some way. Like I'm always so fascinated to wonder, like, what did they think of each other?
I mean, the interesting point is, Jen, there are two really good examples I can think about the idea of interbreeding, and that's obviously between us and Neanderthals. It's clearly there in the DNA.
Yeah.
I mean, taking the physical evidence, the actual scientific evidence away, and you've answered an interesting point there. What do they actually think of each other? That's one point. And then we go back to our old friend, Mr. Naledi, or Miss Naledi.
Yes.
Miss Naledi was roaming that landscape the same time as modern humans. And again, it'd be interesting. I mean, again, we haven't got the hard science yet or results back on the material from Rising Star, but there could be instances there where there is an interplay. I wouldn't say a sexual interplay, but certainly an interplay between modern humans and Naledi walking at least side by side. And again, another interesting point. And again, it's just a question more than anything else. But if you've got two sets of footprints at this site going in the same direction, two things come to mind: is that both species are looking for the easiest route to get from one area of the landscape to the other. Yeah. So I'm wondering if if you had the geologists down there, I wonder if they've been mapping out the sand spits, the gravel spits, for allow easy access from wherever they were habiting to where they were going to. And I think, especially if the footprints are orientated the same way, which I think they are, if I'm correct.
Yeah, no, I think they were heading in the same direction. Am I right, Seth? I feel like they were both heading, I don't know what direction it was, but they were both heading in the same direction.
They were, as far as I know.
So no, isn't that cool? No, it's a wonderful story. I mean, I think that was, it's it opens up so many interesting new areas to think about that you're like, yeah, like, and even my last thought on this, because I know we want to, so much to cover, was thinking as well about the fact that when we recreate Paranthropus, we always make them look really furry and like almost gorilla-like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we don't
Yeah.
know what they look like. Like, we have no idea. I mean, look at dinosaurs. Like, they're like, oh,
Right.
they had feathers. We had no idea. They're basically big, angry, scary chickens, some of them, you know? And it's like, which changes your entire perception. So we don't know how much or how little fur Paranthropus had, right?
Right.
You know, they might have
Right.
been more like that, you know, that sort of short, well-built wrestler type. We don't know, right? Versus the taller, more gracile, sort of the Homo erectus. Like, we don't know what they would have thought or what they looked like to each other, or even what they actually looked like. We have no idea. So it's so fun to have that snapshot moment, right? That we know they walked that shore together 1.5 million years ago. It's so cool.
Well, moving 1.49 million years ago forward, in the River Severn estuary, which is the largest estuary we have, it's what we call the Bristol Channel, and that's been looked at by a colleague of mine, Martin Bell, for a long time, and his team identified a few years ago. It's a lovely story. 3 sets of footprints, 2 adults and 1 little child in the middle. So they were obviously holding his hand or her hand and walking out into the estuary. Now, the River Severn, or the Severn Estuary today, or the Bristol Channel today, is a large expanse of water, but it would have been on that cusp when it was once a fertile plain for mammoth, elk, bison, horse, etc. And obviously the sea level rise, and the sea level rise was quite rapid after 10,000 BP. It's more than likely that they were walking in an estuarine area in the Gurcha muds, and they left their footprints. And again, just a lovely story of having 2 adults, probably male and female, or maybe 2 males or 2 females, and a little child in between the 2 sets of adult footprinents. And that idea of just walking on a Sunday afternoon, eating an ice cream and walking towards the centre of the Bristol Channel. Just a lovely story. And it's all about being human. You know, the science is now starting to tell us about the idea about relationship society, organised society, and I think I'm hoping that the science that has unravelled these footprints 1.5 million years ago will be able to put some humanity. Well, humanity is probably not the right word. Some hominity to.
We need a new word. There you go. Trademark George. Homininity. There we go. So speaking of fossils, because again, Seth, you were saying that footprints are considered to be trace fossils, right? Because it's like they're leaving a trace of something. I'm going to show you my favorite fossil, which is, so this is a bivalve. That's the right word for it, George, when it's a clamshell. So this is a bivalve from the bottom of the tethys. So this is from, how old would this be, George? If it was from sort of the bottom of the tethys, is it?
Mr. Mystic Meg tells me it comes from the Mesozoic period.
So how long ago?
That's Cretaceous, Jurassic, and Triassic. So it's about 230, 250 million years ago. It's older than me.
That's my favorite. Yeah, a little older than me too. So I was laughing because I wanted to use that. So I don't know if everybody has fossils. I certainly have fossils. I have a little collection. My son has a collection. George, I bet you have a collection of fossils.
I have a lovely collection. Yeah.
Okay, so I was laughing at this wonderful story, which I want to talk about now. This is my introduction to the story. So it's Prado Vargas Cave in Spain. And the researchers there, so it's Marta Navazo Ruiz of the Universidad de Burgos. And so they found 15 marine fossils in that one cave, dating to somewhere between about 40,000 to 55,000 years ago. And so these are marine fossils. So these are basically shells they're mollusks and echinoderms, but basically there are a lot of really cool looking shells. We'll make sure we get a photo up for people so they can see it. And somebody seems to have been collecting them and stashing them in the cave for no reason that really makes sense. Now, what I thought was neat, and I'm not slamming their theory, however, I thought it was funny that they automatically assumed it was a kid collecting the fossils, and I was like, I haven't looked in my drawer. So, but I think that like that concept, what they were flagging, other than it's fun to collect fossils, was that's that idea of we're going back to non-utilitarian behavior, right? Like that concept that there's nothing about the fossils you need to survive. Like you don't pick them up so you can eat them, so you can keep them warm, so you can build shelter with them, or like there's nothing about them from a utilitarian point of view that is useful. It is more that they are neat or pretty, or they caught somebody's eye, or like, do you want, like, there was something about them people liked that was not that basic level of survival. And so these are the kinds of things, for viewers who maybe haven't completely followed us before, like about the fact that we have almost like a symbolic checklist to try and understand when people, and this people in the larger hominin sense, when they started thinking more like us. And so collecting things for aesthetic purposes would fall into that category. Like that is a more symbolic, higher thinking kind of type of behavior. Because in this case, I believe it is associated with Neanderthals. Yeah, it is associated. Yeah, so it's Neanderthals. So again, Neanderthals once again doing something that we would consider to be very human behavior, right?
And we're learning from them, Jen. We're learning from them, I think.
Yep. Yeah.
I think there's a degree of cross-fertilizing information going back and forth between Neanderthals and modern humans.
Yeah. Well, especially by this time period, because if we're talking between 40 and 55,000, and now, I mean, we have humans like Homo sapien are in certainly Central Europe by what, 54, 55,000, I think now. And there's that cave in Spain, I think, from around 50-ish. So, I mean, I think the dates there's a lot of movement with dates, and part of it for viewers who maybe aren't up on their dating methods, which is totally okay, it's that, you know, again, when we only had carbon dating is not good much further back than about 40,000. So we would kind of run out of material, like the material just degrades and then there's nothing left for us to date. So you can usually get up to 40, maybe 50 if you've got really good sampling. But we don't know much beyond that. So now with uranium series and these other methods, we're able to revisit sites, we're able to date things that were, you know, that weren't charcoal, so we can suddenly date new materials, and it's starting to really expand our understanding. So I think, yeah, there's a lot there, but I mean, I'm trying to think where would they have been finding these fossil marine shells, do you think, George? Like, were they in walls or rocks, or where would they have been getting them? That's what I wanted to know. I didn't see anything about that article.
I think we underestimate sometimes on archaeological sites, especially in limestone areas. And guess what? Most of the bloody caves in Spain and Portugal and the British Isles are in limestone. Totally. And what you've got indicative in limestone are fossils, depending on what fossil bed you're looking at. Yeah. And I think we have underestimated as archaeologists the importance of fossils. Now, there's two really good stories. I'll just briefly go through them with you. But there's one site called Aveline's Hole. Had to be a hold in it in the British Isles. And Aveline's Hole is a really weird cave. It's in the Cheddar Gorge, so it's near Bristol, in a limestone area. It's a beautiful area of outstanding natural beauty. It's been designated an area of outstanding natural beauty. And the cave, which is scheduled, yielded, and again, I'm sort of moving forward a lot from 40,000 to about 10,000 BC. But around about 10,000 BC, Mesolithic, early Mesolithic, or maybe late Upper Paleolithic individuals or communities were burying their dead in there. And they when they excavated the site, they pulled out in between the two world wars 70 individuals, and each of those individuals had, guess what, red ochre scattered over the body. Surprise, surprise. And also, which is really interesting, a small ammonite fossil on the chest.
Oh, those are the spirally ones, right?
Yeah. And those are Jurassic. Well, they're Mesozoic, Jurassic, or Cretaceous. Probably Cretaceous, but they were actually sought.
There you go. Seth's showing us an ammonite. I love it. Yeah. See, Seth has his fossils too. Oh my gosh! See, we're all a bunch of fossil nerds. I mean, unsurprised. Quelle surprise, right? But you know, oh, so I didn't know that. So again, they're finding. So are these things falling out of? Because I know limestone does degrade pretty easily, or are they actually knocking them out? Maybe a bit of both.
No. What's happening, which is really interesting, is no fossil very little fossil evidence within Cheddar Gorge. These fossils are actually sourced 25 kilometers away. So people from that community are going to that site, picking up the fossils, and then bringing them individually, maybe, to the deceased and placing them over the chest of individuals in that cave. Now, the big snag was that thanks to Hitler's Luftwaffe, they decided to take a little trip out one night, I think around about 1941, and bomb the hell out of Bristol, including the museum. But thanks to a tenacious museum curator, he picked up all the artifacts they could find in the debris of the bomb site.
Yeah,
and we have, I think, around about 8 or 9 pieces of that fossil evidence left.
Amazing.
Which is now housed in the University of Bristol Speleological Society Museum. But the interesting thing is that fossils are being used as ways of dealing with the dead. And again, why? No idea. Mm-hmm. But what we can say is that they do stick out from other items of nature. They're ergonomic, they're symmetrical, they stand out.
Yeah, they catch the eye, kind of thing, right? They're an interesting shape. Yeah.
And it's more than likely that Paleolithic communities and Mesolithic communities wouldn't know what the hell where they came from, but they felt it important to place it over the bodies of the deceased, over 70 individuals, in a cave in Cheddar Gorge. And it is actually the largest early Mesolithic stroke late Upper Paleolithic cemetery we have in the British Isles. Now, just one other little story is that my colleague Nicholas Spartan did a project, a really good project, in fact, on the Wye Valley, which is not too far from Cheddar Gorge, just a little bit north. Those who are watching me or listening to me, Google Monmouth, which is a beautiful town on the Welsh borders, and just above that, there's this beautiful Wye Gorge which meanders through a limestone area, and there. Nick found some tiny little shells called cowrie shells, and this is where it gets really amazing. Is that these were found in a rock shelter site. Mm-hmm. There was no burial context because there'd been a lot of rockfall occurring, and also a lot of washing from the River Wye, which is the river that flows through this gorge. And but the 6 shells he pulled out of that site came from about 150 kilometers away.
Oh, wow. And they were fossil shells too. So they weren't like modern ones. These were actually fossil shells that because again, that speaks to so much intention. And
exactly.
like in both those cases where it's like, I am specifically taking the time and effort to go do this thing. And it's fascinating too. I'm thinking with the dead one as well, that was literally like a funerary tradition, which was we need to go get a spiral shell for our dead. They come from this spot. Like, oh my gosh, that speaks like there's just so much depth there, even if we don't know exactly what's going on.
I mean, what we could be looking at as well, Jen, and we could be looking at this idea of contact and exchange as well, because maybe the communities owning these shells or these fossils have some form of barter system going on, or some sort of a lineage going on where they can bring those specific shells from a specific site, and they're not just scattered across the landscape. These are specific species ammonites for Aveline's Hole, and these are 25 kilometers away from a particular fossil bed. So that's a really interesting thing to consider. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's so wonderful. No, that's I think there's so much. There's just all these wonderful new stories. I think they're just constantly. It's like it's enriching and kind of widening our understanding of like the depth of Paleolithic life. Like that there's so much more going on than just like hunting a mammoth or like, making a fire. Like it's just, it's wild how much, the more we know, the more we realize how much they were like us. And I think, it's fantastic. So, well, speaking of that, I'm going to shift us because I know we got so much to talk about. Unless there's anything else either one of you wanted to talk about with fossils. Oh, Seth has a thought.
Oh, no, I'll just add one thing.
Okay,
I hope that the Spanish team who have been excavating that cave and they found these fossils, I hope they have a geologist on board who specializes in paleontology, who can maybe source those fossils. And I'll bet you any money that he or she will be able to source those to a specific fossil bed.
Speaking of looking right here, there is a geologist, Alfonso Benito Calvo. And he
Right.
said that they were carrying the fossils to the cave.
Right. There
So
we are.
literally exactly what you said. So isn't that amazing? So again, they were coming from a fossil bed somewhere. Yeah, at the moment, at the moment they are the earliest known fossil collectors. Because it wasn't just one, there was this collection of the 15 of them. So yeah, no, it's such a I love these. But again, I was like, I don't know if I can blame it. I don't know if it's a kid thing. Could have been a grown-up thing too. Because if it was me, I always like, I mean, I'm collecting pebbles on the beach constantly too. I'm one of those people. So but I like to collect things. I always have like rocks in my pockets and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we have learned so much so far about these amazing stories that have happened in the amazing world of paleoanthropology. And, as we've been doing the last few episodes, we've been reaching out to you guys, the viewers, and asking for questions to see if there's anything that you would like answered or something that you are dying to know about. So we've received a few interesting questions, and we've picked a few that we're going to answer for this episode. And I'm going to hand that over to Genevieve to let her answer some of those questions. And they're quite interesting.
They're
So
fun. Yeah, I've picked two so far. Okay. So the first one's from Phil Descola. And he says, could you guys cover in an episode on how cave voyagers were able to light their way far into cave systems? I understand they used torches. I know, right? See, I got excited too. I understand they used torches, but what were the torches made of and from? And did they carry many to light one at a time? Sincerely yours, Phil Descola. Thanks, Phil. Awesome question. Okay, go, George. I know you have things to say.
Oh my goodness me! Well, we're actually opening up a very interesting thing in many respects. Can I talk for hours? Yes, why not?
I know, of course.
Well, I'm involved. I'm involved in an archaeoacoustics project in Portugal, and I'm going to be on the 25th of January. Going to be in a cave testing out the archaeoacoustics. However, I have also asked this question about the idea of light or illumination in caves, because if you've got a cave like, and again, for those viewers or listeners who don't know the caves of the Dordogne, for example, there's one fascinating cave there called Ruffiniak, which I've talked to previously before. And in order to get from the entrance to the actual rock art area is 2.5 kilometers. And today, if you're going there as a visitor, you get on a little mining train and you go.
It's the best.
All the way through 2 kilometers into the cave system. However, the question you must have to ask yourself, Phil, and you've asked the right question, is how on earth do you keep, or how on earth do you maneuver and navigate through a very, very complex cave system with little niches and side alleys and passages going off to the left and the right? How do you actually get that site? Well, the one thing that I understood certainly in Rising Star Cave was that we decided to come across slight sort of red blobby markers. I think they're markers anyway. So in order to get through, for example, the post box, which is an absolute swine of an entrance, and to maneuver through that and to go down around the right corners.
Oh, it's so fun. That's the upside down turnaround you're talking about there, right?
Yeah,
that was my favorite.
That's the one I had nightmares about. Anyway, when we were down there, Polly found a marker and I found another marker further out. And so I think quite clearly, I might say it's Naledi. I'm not saying it's a modern human, but I think it probably is more likely modern human. They are marking that cave system with markers in order to get through to where they want to get to. However, the question is, Phil, how do you see those markers? And again, what's quite interesting is that when you come to a junction, and this is something we found in another part of the cave system as well, clearly not just painted blobs on strategic parts of the cave, but also engraved lines. And in order to look at those, I think you'd have to take down, because it takes about 40 to 45 minutes to maneuver through certain areas of that cave system. But going back to Ruffiniak, to maneuver through 2.5 kilometers would take about 2 or 3 hours on foot, because you have to climb over this, go down in that, and it's very, very difficult. So I think that you go down there as a group, maybe as a group of initiates, maybe. Again, it's another social theory for humanity thing to think about. But you go down there with multiple torches made from animal fats, and as one becomes or one dies out, you light another one, and then you maneuver through the cave like that. And there's no way you can do it in complete darkness, too dangerous, and you don't know where you're going.
Oh no,
So
you would die. No, you need light. So okay, so to take it back, I'm gonna pull back on you for 1 second here, because of course the thing is, it's always so hard because of course this is what we think about and do all the time. Okay, so for people who may not know much about this, we have good evidence of them using torches in caves, and so the evidence is what we find is we find torch marks on the walls, and so what we know is we see the spot, because as your torch is burning down, you have to knock off the dead stuff, right, in order to keep it burning well. So we find spots where they're actually knocking the torch against the wall to knock off that chunk of burned charcoal, and get the torch down. And so places like Chauvet, they've actually used those to date one of the times that people came through the site. And so again, these torch marks are great. They're not art, but they're like one of those byproducts, right? Like the mark is a byproduct of a different activity, which in this case is kind of banging the torch down. Now, torches, obviously, the downside, they are smoky. They burn out. You can only have so much of them. And so the thing with a torch is that certainly in some of these caves with lower oxygen, tight passages, a torch is not going to be very much fun, though. It would get pretty uncomfortable and smoky potentially pretty quickly. We do have caves, of course, too, where they've actually lit hearths in the rooms, like in the chambers where they're making the art. I've seen that too. There's a few caves with hearths, right, George? Like I'm thinking of that, so that they were illuminating the whole room, basically, right?
Rising Star has that all over.
Yeah, so that they're actually lighting hearths inside the cave, so they have fires inside the cave. But again, depending on your ventilation, it could be great, could be a little smoky and uncomfortable. So then what we have certainly in Europe, I don't know enough about the rest of the world to know about there, but in Europe, and we'll do it better as well. I'm going to show this. This is what somebody invented. So that is that is a little carved stone lamp. Isn't that wild? I love our ancestors. They're so smart. They're the best. That's from around 22,000, because that one's from Lascaux. And so what that is of course I shut the book. Oh, it's okay. I had it open. So again, just to show the viewers. So this is from Lascaux Cave. And so what they were doing was literally, they realized, and I think this was again for efficiency, or Lascaux has huge decorated panels, right? Like it's there. They were obviously down there for a while. And so somebody had the bright idea that if you took that animal fat and you put it into the stone lamp, because they've done the chemical analysis, and so they were putting animal fat into there and then using, I believe it was moss as a wick, and they were literally creating these little lamps, which were then much less smoky, more efficient. And they were taking the lamps with them into the cave. So that's like a huge invention. And I love the fact they invented it probably to improve their art making experience. And then I remember reading, correct me if I'm wrong, George, I'm trying to remember the exact details of the study, but it was one of our fellow researchers did an experiment at Neo Cave, where he actually went down with one of the stone lamps with extra fat and extra wicks, right? And because within Neo, to get to the part where they decorated again, it's quite deep, right? I've never actually been in Neo, but
it's deep and dangerous.
Yeah, so he took with him extra fat and extra wicks, and I believe with what he had with him, he was able to stay down there for like 4 or 5 hours easily. Never ran out of light. Was able to traverse it. So again, he was imagining the people who went down, what they would have had to do. And again, the deeper you are, depending on the ventilation, it might not be that great to have a fire or smoke down there. Now, again, that could also be part of the sensory deprivation experience. A little bit of anoxia might be a good way to hit an altered state of consciousness. But I love the concept of invention and them actually innovating something in order to improve the art making experience. So that was kind of what I liked about that question.
I think also that that wick that you showed us in that book, it's more than like they held it in their teeth, so they'd have 2 hands free.
Yeah, see, because again, these are small. Yeah, they're quite small. I should also point out, just from a personal point of view, since I'm interested in geometric signs, that there's also markings that are on the handle of that, that are absolutely not necessary for anything other than being decorative or having some sort of graphic meaning. So I like that too, that I was like, ooh, there's marks. And
Yeah,
so these lamps have been found, but I think it starts around the last glacial maximum, doesn't it? Like somewhere around 23,000, I think is about the oldest. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
after that, they transition more. I'm sure they still use torches, but we see more and more lamps as
Mm.
after that time period. So it's a really cool switch that takes place to a more efficient technology, which I love. I love seeing the technological innovations. I think that one's fun.
Just going to add that the one thing we're going to be experimenting with on the 25th of January in Portugal is we're going to be experimenting obviously with sound, because it's an acoustics project, but also we're going to be looking at light as well. And again, one thing that we haven't talked about, again, it's another episode in many respects, is the idea about how light in a cave illuminates engravings and paintings, and also more importantly, that how it plays on the neuropsychology of the mind about animals moving, dancing,
Yes.
whatever. And the flickering light, it all has a lot to do with this idea of ambience, which I think, again, something which is ignored by archaeologists, but taken on board, thank God, by art historians.
Yeah. Well, I think that the flicker is really important. The flicker, it changes, again, it gives it more of an animation sense. It changes the entire feeling when you're down there with that more minimal light and things like that. So yeah, no, I think it's a fascinating area where experimental archaeology meets like innovative technologies, and then also again that idea of it being for non-utilitarian purposes, right? Like they're doing it to navigate around caves better, often to make art. So I love how art is actually like inspiring potentially like sort of technical engineering and innovation. So it was a great question, Phil. I'm so glad you asked it. Any other thoughts from anyone, or should we move on to our next question?
I'll just ask Phil if he's happy with the answers we've given him.
Yeah.
And if he wants us to elaborate, please get in contact.
Oh, anytime. I know. We could do a whole episode just on that easily. But now we're going to move on to, I've got another question from Romulo Ramos, and he actually asked two. So Romulo, we're gonna answer one of yours today, which was, he was asking about, and I thought this was a kind of a fun one. He was asking about the laser technology that we use in caves to like create like a 3D, like a point map kind of thing in a cave. Because I've mentioned it before, and so he was wondering if the beams of the laser, if they can have any impact on, because they're bouncing off the wall, are they potentially changing the radioactivity, or changing, like, could they change the dates of things because it's interacting and that kind of thing? And so he wanted to know if it could alter the dating process, like, carbon dating or uranium dating, if we're pinging lasers off of it. So again, excellent question. So I was thinking for that we probably should start really quickly by explaining what it is. So,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert. I'm not the person who would do that on a team, because you have people who specialize in doing that kind of laser sort of 3D scanning, very detailed mapping. They're basically creating a three-dimensional recreation of the entire cave by pinging thousands of laser points at the wall, and then what it's measuring is they measure how long it takes for the laser to come back. So if there's a crack in the wall, the laser is going to take a split second to go further in and come back a little slower. So you're getting that 3D boom, 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 boom of the whole wall of a cave, ceiling, floor, everything. They can do the whole thing. I know that's not very technical, but George, would you say, is that sort of a good description of a basic?
Well, I can elaborate on this, because I've done now 3 caves using what we call point cloud technology. And the first one I did was actually Cat Hole Cave in 2010.
Perfect.
And just those people who are listening and watching, laser, I love it. Light amplification, showing the emission of a radiation. So basically, it's emitting radiation or radioactive beams out to the wall, and the amount of radiation incorporated into that laser is minute. I'd say
It
it won't.
is.
So it doesn't interfere with any sort of the physical surface of the rock itself or the rock art, and it doesn't change any of the microclimate. So it's pretty safe stuff.
Yeah, because it doesn't
And
get hot either, right? Like I
no,
think that's
no, it
kind of
doesn't.
I've always thought of it as being what I would call like a non-reactive technology or non-interactive. Like, could is it also? I'm going to ask you this, George, because I was thinking about because it was a good question. Um, because I think it's often using infrared, right? Like, is that kind of where is it pinging more in the infrared type? Like the things that we would be more worried about was if it was a very fast frequency, like the kind of radiation that comes from the sun, and we're not using that part
No,
of the
no.
light spectrum. We're using much slower beams, which is more down into the red, right? So like more that
That's right. Yeah,
slow, lazy bloop, like this, not the little like a gamma ray or something. We're not using that.
yeah, and the thing is, it's very much like a laser pen when we're doing our
Yeah.
lecturing using a laser. It's that safe. And again, if there was any harm, then we wouldn't be using it in a lecture theatre.
No.
But just to put the viewers in the picture, I've just got a cave, a Churchill cave, in fact, where we found the first rock art in Britain, Paleolithic rock art in Britain in 2003. I've just had that laser scanned.
No
And
way. That's cool.
yeah. But what was really interesting about that, Ramos, is it Ramos? Is it Ramos? The name of the guy?
Romulo. Romulo was the first
Romulo.
name. Yeah.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah.
No, Ramos was the last name. You were right, but that was the last name.
I do beg your pardon. But what's really quite interesting about this is that we got the 3D point cloud scan of the whole cave, and I mean the whole cave, and it took billions of data of dot hitting the wall and coming back again, and it works out around about 0.2 of a millimeter.
Wow.
So five of those laser shots to the wall equals 1 millimeter.
That's wild. And so this is kind of like one of those, like almost like a total station, right? Where you have like something you put down in the middle of the room with like a big proper tripod under it, and then it just.
What you have to do is set up a series of stations along the cave.
Yeah.
So they cross over. So there's a sort of like a crossover between the different data, and then that data should match up. It's very much like triangulation. When triangulating. So if you're doing old-fashioned mapping out in the landscape, it does exactly the same, but obviously a billionth of a time quicker.
So huge resolution, really fast, and I think they've even used it sometimes, like when because they rebuilt part of Chauvet, right? Like they used the point cloud to get a very accurate reading of the entire cave, and then they actually printed out basically the cave, right? Is that kind of what they did for the Chauvet?
They've done it with three. They've done it with Chauvet, Lascaux 2, and Altamira.
So
those three of the most important caves in Europe.
Yeah.
We've now got 3D facsimile copies of.
Yeah. So and it's also preserving it for the future, right? Because I'm picturing, of course, me and my love of tech is like we're not that far off potentially being able to build these places in like VR. I mean, I saw La Garma, like at the Santander Museum, I saw La Garma by 3D in glasses. And that La Garma, I guarantee, was probably done also using that kind of 3D point cloud scanning technology. So it's very cool stuff. But yeah, it's non-interactive, non-reactive. It's cold, so we don't have to worry about it making it warm in there, which can like set off the fungi and things. And because it's a red light, it's not like it's not going to trigger things to grow. Like I think it's kind of more like when you have to watch out more with bringing like daylight into the caves or warmth into the caves or things that would alter it or make fungi or moss or things grow. And also it's not the right kind of frequency of light that would interact or change the radioactivity of the materials there. It's more like it's just bouncing off, but in a very benign, non-interactive way.
And also, we did a 60-meter spread of cave at Churchill in a day. And also the other thing as well, which is really interesting, is now I've just done it for Bacon Hole as well, is that we can now render the colours of the rock, the mosses, the lichens
Wow.
that we find in these cave systems.
Yeah.
So if you were to use a 3D sort of goggle interactive show of that cave, you would actually think you're walking through it rather than seeing a series of geometric lines creating the cave walls. These are now rendered in such a way that it would be almost impossible not to get confused whether you're either in the cave or not.
That's
It's
amazing.
that clever.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's going to be when it comes down to starting to future-proof things, right? Like, like recording things for future generations. I mean, I think this is going to be a really key technology. So, it's it's only getting better and better. But yeah, it's actually, what do they call it? Photorealistic. Like, it's basically now we're almost rendering it photorealistic. So that's amazing. Oh, I love hearing about that. So, well, huge thank you to Romulo Ramos for the excellent question. And I think we could either keep going for hours or we should probably stop there before we get too far. But we don't want to keep people for too long. And there's already so many stories for the next episode. Holy smokes.
Right? There's so much going on that we really do have to call an end at some point. But we have another episode coming up that we're going to be recording soon.
Yeah.
And things are going to be picking up. Our new editor is going to be having more free time. And so you're going to see episodes come out more regularly. Again, a huge shout out and thank you to Darren.
Yay, Darren.
We want to say a huge thank you to all of our listeners. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We make these out of the kindness of our hearts. We don't get anything out of doing this. So please, if you can just help spread the word, it really helps us out. So please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're a fan of the Paleo Post Podcast, let us know. All right, guys, this is Seth signing out. Thank you and have a good day.